Alright, I'll give credit where credit is due. That was actually kind of adorable. My biggest complaint about this scene, though, is I have to rewrite the script for this video again. Almost a year has passed since the original airing of the Pokemon XY and XY and Z anime. Time sure does fly, doesn't it? Many people still agree that in terms of writing quality that this saga just might be one of the best yet for the long-running anime. Excluding anything that we have not yet seen in full as of the creation of this video. But of course, there have also been a few particular attention grabbers beyond the subtle art of writing and detailed animations, such as the digital battle backgrounds, One Punch Man reincarnated as a badass ninja frog, and then we have Amourshipping. As far as the Pokemon anime goes, over the 3 years long run of the Pokemon X and Y and XYZ saga, Amourshipping has become the biggest thing since, well, basically Pokeshipping. For those of you who don't already know somehow, a shipping refers to supporting, advocating for, or in some way musing over the idea of two fictional characters getting together in a romantic relationship. It's pretty common for the main male character and main female character to be shipped together by the fans and or in some cases the writers themselves in any given series. Hence the origins of Pokeshipping, which is the pairing between Misty and Ash. Eventually that one ended with Misty realizing that her feelings were one-sided as she left the crew, or that's how it went down in the English version anyways. I've heard that it's more ambiguous as it was seen in Japan, but I'm not an expert on that kind of thing quite yet. Regardless, Amourshipping on the other hand refers to the pairing between Ash and Serena, a newer character who made her first appearance in Pokemon X and Y Episode 1, which was about 4 years ago IRL time, but Pokemon has already celebrated like its 20th anniversary, so relatively Serena is still pretty new. There have been plenty of other fan shippings for the Pokemon anime in the past, of course, consisting of wildly varying degrees of plausibility and ridiculousness, because that's just how shipping works. I mean, even the official, unofficial theme song for shipping culture is blatantly shameless about this. Like, pretty much anything goes. But what makes Amourshipping different from other shippings in the Pokemon anime is that not only does it involve an explicitly confirmed canon crush that is actually in the anime, but it has also become one of the main focuses of the X and Y anime as a whole. Amourshipping is also credited with being responsible for getting many old fans of Pokemon back into the show, often for the first time in many years. But of course, some would inevitably be less enthusiastic about the pairing than others for various reasons. And over the course of the 3-year run of X and Y, the debate as to whether these two were even intended to get together in the first place had always left shippers and non-shippers alike guessing. And arguing, but that's just YouTube for you. The fascinating part is that almost from the beginning, it seems like the show has been set up so that this pairing really can go either way. Even from a feminist perspective, believe it or not, which will be the focus of this video. The two obvious possible outcomes, depending on how they would be executed, could have a different but uniquely positive message for the young girls who do indeed watch the anime, by the way. But which ending should be given, that's the question. I'm not going to be exclusively pro-Amourshipping or anti-Amourshipping in this video, but I am going to first and foremost take a thorough and respectful look at both sides of this particular argument regarding Amourshipping. Interpretation of what the real ending we got means can wait till later. On one hand, there is the scenario where after all is said and done, Serena and Ash do not end up getting together. And there would be some legitimately good reasons for this besides just writers being the expert trolls that they are. We need to remember that Pokemon is a show that, like I've already implied, often attempts to be geared for all ages and genders. The age factor can be seen in the combination of subtle mature themes present in the games as well as the anime, along with the fun play scenes present in many anime episodes and in almost all of the movies, which are primarily meant to appeal to the younger audience. But age is not the only important factor to look at here. This isn't about just, oh, we can't show two characters kissing or anything, there are kids watching. No. This is something more constructive and based on a more specific demographic. For years, the Pokemon Company has clearly expected a portion of their audience to be young girls, in both the West and the East. The writers of the anime have acknowledged this since Misty left by attempting to incorporate side stories that focus on the female character of the time, namely Pokemon contests. Even Iris participated in just about every battle activity other than gym battles. But Serena is a very odd one in terms of how her own personal story began. May, for example, was introduced as a girl who wanted to see the world. Romance was kind of on her mind sometimes, but it wasn't at the top of her list of priorities. Dawn had a clear-cut goal right from the start, much like Ash did, and her story focused squarely on her career as a coordinator. Iris also had a clear-cut goal from the start, even if she was a little bit of a drifter. At least as far as the raw concept goes, you can't get much more empowering than being the girl who tames dragons, even if it takes her a while for her to succeed. But by contrast, Serena seems to have had one thing on her mind when she started her journey. Not only was she chasing after a boy, but she was also chasing after a boy whom, as far as we can tell, she's only spoken to exactly once. Her personality itself isn't so bad. There's a lot a little girl can relate to in just her first few episodes, particularly with regards to her unusually realistic relationship with her mom. From whining about her mom forcing her to do something she doesn't want to, and wearing clothes her mom doesn't like just to spite or tease her, which is something even I have a guilty pleasure of doing to my own mom. The writers clearly put a lot of effort into doing what they were trying to do here. And the dynamic relationship between Serena and her mom is very refreshing after the complete snorefest of Dawn's household. However, as soon as she leaves the house, her crush on Ash became the main factor keeping her an important character in the anime for nearly 47 episodes, only eventually replaced by her newfound goal of becoming a Pokemon performer. But much more on that later. It all began when Serena happened to recognize Ash when she saw him on the news on TV. She then immediately decides to start her Pokemon journey right then and there so that she can track down Ash. Apparently she had neglected to begin a Pokemon journey when she first turned 10, probably in part because of her Rhyhorn training, but lack of interest was probably also a factor given that her mother did not object to her leaving to start her journey when she did. While she is searching for Ash, we see a very brief flashback of a younger-looking Ash, and we hear Serena thinking about how surprised Ash will be to see her after all these years. As viewers at the time, we were led to believe that they actually were old friends. I mean, to this day, we know next to nothing about Ash before he turned 10 in episode 1, so it actually did not seem far-fetched at all for this to be the case. She eventually tracked him down in Santalone City, only for him to not even remember her, but they ended up becoming fast friends anyways. Shortly after they begin traveling together, we are then given the full flashback that we have only seen tiny snippets of before. Apparently, during summer camp, Serena was lost, scared, and hurt her knee. Ash found her, attempted to treat her knee, and attempted to raise her spirits and brought her back to camp. Serena tells this story to Ash when she returns to him the very handkerchief he used to treat her knee, which then prompts Ash to remember the girl with the straw hat. What? After this flashback, we are never given anything else about their time at camp. This little scene of Ash rescuing her from the wilderness is the only thing we are ever given to justify her initial crush on Ash, and her willingness to walk halfway across the region to find him. Young Ash in the flashback needs to introduce himself as if they had never met, and in the present day, Ash remembered the hat she wore, but not her name. If they went to the same summer camp, then why were they apparently strangers? Why haven't we seen more moments from this time when they first met? There have been plenty of opportunities for the writers to add more to Serena and Ash's backstory regarding their relationship. Heck, even the characters themselves even pointed it out at the beginning of the Sycamore Summer Camp arc.
Does this bring back any memories of when you two first met each other?
Yeah, it does. Let's make it as much fun as when we were kids.
But after this, nothing really new came out of it other than a reenactment of the same flashback we've already seen. So as far as we can tell, this flashback shows the entire extent of Ash and Serena's relationship in their childhood. But for lack of a better explanation for the first several episodes of the anime, I am going to point you guys to a theory that does make a surprising amount of sense made by another YouTuber regarding this topic. Feel free to take a minute to watch it, but to put it in the briefest of terms, basically, according to Pokemon Ranger Boy, if we assume that Serena had a generally unhappy childhood, then perhaps she remembers Ash because it was one of her few happy memories. This fury does not significantly change the nature of what's going on from the obvious knight in shining armor themes, but it does cause the situation to make more sense for the older viewers. It's pretty hard to pick up on in the anime canon, especially since they chose to wrap the earliest stages of her development around girly stereotypes like not wanting to get dirty, instead of highlighting that Serena might be learning that she doesn't have to fear the outside world as someone who supposedly doesn't have many memories of happiness. I suppose if one knows anything about gymnastics or the politics of sports and the Olympics and stuff in general, the simple fact that she was training for a sport at all was probably supposed to be the red flag in and of itself. But even so, I did not see this reason for Serena's crush on Ash until I saw Pokemon Ranger Boy's video myself, so there's that. The more obvious girly and fairy tale themes used in Serena's character arc are not entirely uncalled for due to a few reasons. First, the Pokemon Company has been trying to appeal to girly girls in particular through the anime. They probably figured that tomboys are going to be interested in Ash's character arc and the video games already, so they don't have to try as hard to keep their attention, especially since they have female gym leaders to showcase here and there. Furthermore, this makes even more sense when we take Japanese culture and its local audience into account. Certain kinds of gender norms are just more accepted in Japan than in the West, even among the relatively more progressive crowd. However, by gender norms, I'm not, at the moment anyway, talking about submission to men or staying in the kitchen. In fact, women are actually expected to have a career nowadays. There is still social pressure to get married eventually, and the workplace still is not set up very well with parenthood in mind, which is probably part of why many women haven't even been bothering to get married at all. But media aimed at the youngest girls, and children in particular, have celebrated the career woman at least as far back as Sailor Moon and Kiki's Delivery Service. But it's particularly notable in the anime feature film that overtook Star Wars in the movie theater not too long ago. Yep, I'm talking about Yokai Watch and a YouTube video about Pokemon again. Bear with me here, people. Anyways, the second Yokai Watch full-length movie dedicates a substantial amount of screen time to a young working-age woman who strives and works hard to become a clothing designer. Yep, a clothing designer. These are the kinds of gender norms I'm trying to talk about here. There are two ways we can look at these occupational gender norms. The first is that one of the biggest motivational factors for why American culture has put so much emphasis on getting rid of occupational stereotypes is because we value free will and individuality above all else. In contrast, according to traditional Japanese culture, you're supposed to do your part for the good of the whole. While this does provide unique and very serious challenges for Japan regarding equal pay and getting women into politics, several Japanese women's movements and policies have decidedly focused on elevating the woman's status and well-being within the existing society, rather than abolishing gender norms entirely. So it makes sense that getting rid of something as innocuous as the girls like fashion stereotype would be generally low on their list of priorities compared to Western movements. But another important aspect about girliness, or specifically cuteness or kawaii-ness, in Japan is that the original conception of kawaii culture was actually meant to be rebellious in nature. The counterculture phenomena is said to have begun when some schoolgirls began using cutesy and informal writing in school. It got banned in school but was quickly picked up by popular culture and is still going strong to this day. Of course, despite critics having accused the phenomena as causing women to behave immaturely, even though a lot of guys have been hopping on board the cutesy train to some extent as well. It originally has been a rebellion against the traditional expectations of how an adult should behave in an incredibly formal and work-driven culture like in Japan. Think of it as their own equivalent of how Western girls have been rejecting the notion that women should cover up and be chaste and stuff, for better or for worse. But anyways, moving on. Despite being often stereotypically girly by our standards, women as portrayed in anime, particularly anime aimed at young girls and children, has empowered them to become successful and hard-working career women. Or of course, fight evil and stuff. Indeed, the people who work on the Pokemon anime have always tried to send a positive message along this vein of girl power thought. Even when they needed to make a compromise to make a girl that's both a positive role model and to be cute enough eye candy. I'm going to assume that the Pokemon Company still wants Serena to be a positive role model in some way. Appealing to the girl audience and keeping it kid-friendly is, after all, one of the business tactics that helped make Pokemon video games so big in the first place. So if we have this assumption in mind, Because of how arguably tacky the background of their relationship was in the first place, it is entirely possible that one would make it this way precisely because they never intended for them to actually get together in the first place. Seeing what happens next in her character arc only made this possibility more valid. In addition to her connection with Ash, it's also established early on that she doesn't know what to do for life yet. Trying to figure out what one wants to do in life is something that almost anyone can relate to, including many college-age students regardless of gender, by the way. Additionally, the conflict with her mom, who wants Serena to follow in her footsteps to become a Rhyhorn racer, only adds to her journey of self-discovery. She is indeed able to find her dream because her new group of friends provided her the opportunity to relax and try new things, which eventually leads to her becoming a performer. For a time, it almost seemed like Serena was slowly forgetting about her crush on Ash, or at least becoming less obsessed with him and developing a more healthy relationship as a result. One that isn't based on a fantasy or dependence. She has seen what more there is to life besides cute clothes and her annoying mom with a bad fashion sense. Basically, it's Legally Blonde all over again. Except the guy she was chasing after does not just turn out to be an actor. As somewhat cliche this might still sound, I think that her moving on from Ash would be unique enough, because instead of learning that the guy you like might not be as great as he seems, the lesson would instead be about simply gaining a more mature perspective of those cheesy knight in shining armor Disney stories, life and romance in general. It would be a coming-of-age story, rather than a story about guys being jerks. And with that, everything the writers did to try to appeal to the Disney girl type of audience would make complete and total sense. Serena doesn't see him as that boy anymore. She now sees him as a person he is. Nothing more, nothing less. However, this does lead me to the other side of the story. But you might be thinking, after all of that about Serena's initial crush on Ash being a tacky and misled fantasy, how can one possibly justify the two getting together? Well, upon closer inspection, while there are cons, there are also pros. But first, I would like to take a minute to explain my personal relationship with Serena as a character. I am not just a feminist. I also happen to be a tomboy. I don't wear makeup, I have acne and don't care, I played video games, I wanted to play football at one point, but instead ended up doing martial arts. I don't talk proper, I curse a lot off camera, and a little bit on camera, etc., etc. So even though as a feminist I try to understand the pro-feminine style of feminism, on a personal level I still in general prefer tomboyish characters simply because I can typically relate to them much more than girls who are interested in fashion and stuff. This is a personal preference. Needless to say, when I first saw Serena's visual design, even before I saw the show, right from the get-go, I was not very impressed. In her first episodes being about chasing a boy she met, as I would later find out, once, didn't do much to improve my perception of her. Serena as a character is one that I really had to warm up to, and it took me a long time for me to appreciate her as much as I do now. In fact, she has somehow become one of my favorite Pokey girls. I think my perception of Serena began to change most significantly when she became a Pokemon performer, and during the Diancie movie. The Diancie movie was a very subtle one, since all it really did is showcase the group's chemistry during a dire situation at its best. While Ash was the only one in the group who was really the typical action hero badass, Clement, Bonnie, and Serena can still take care of themselves when the three of them work together, and they actually did a pretty good job of doing so. However, there is something that's very easy to overlook in XY Episode 7 that has also caught my attention. So, recently, I happened to have a humanities literature class with a professor who made us read a translation of the Epic of Gilgamesh, literally the oldest surviving piece of literature. How could that possibly have anything to do with Pokemon? Don't worry, it becomes relevant, I promise. So the professor happened to call attention to a particular part of the epic, where a major male character gets on his hands and knees at the feet of a female character and begs her to teach him about civilization and such. Of course, this happens right after a sex scene, but my professor called attention to the moment where the man goes to her feet and asks the woman to teach him as significant, because as he says, this doesn't happen in Western literature very often. So after a bit of time to refresh my memory and catch up on a few things I've missed, I have come to the tentative conclusion that he's mostly right. Female characters are often either love interests, tasked primarily with childcare, or they are the loner type of action hero. Sometimes of the femme fatale type that wouldn't be caught dead teaching anyone anything, let alone anyone willingly seeking them out for that reason. Imagining the Black Widow taking on a student is like imagining Kratos as a father. Wait a sec, all those things actually happened? Sure, Xena the warrior princess took on a willing student, but that student was decidedly female. Female characters are often the ones who need to learn to accept help from others. For example, referring to the Lego Movie and James Bond. When a man is taught by a female, it's usually either played on for laughs, and or the guy needs to get the shit beat out of him for him to realize he might be able to learn something from this chick. Upon close inspection, even in anime, when a male character needs to learn from a female character, it's still often played on for laughs, boob jokes, and or in a way that unnecessarily degrades the wimpy male character being taught. So given that lens, this deceptively simple scene is actually shockingly progressive.
Do you think you could teach me some of the basics like the rules and how to ride?
You mean me?
Yeah, please?
You have so much experience.
Pokemon isn't the only anime that has taken a progressive spin on perceptions of a girl's ability to have something to teach a male character. But I think Pokemon is going to reach one of the wider audiences. And it's really a small victory since most people will not consciously realize that's what the scene is doing. But sometimes it's little things that can make all the difference in the world. And most importantly, this scene also caused me to pay more attention to Serena in X and Y anime. So on to the relationship between Ash and Serena. Now that Serena has grown up and got to know Ash in person for real, the door to the alternate endings to Amourshipping has simultaneously opened. Not only is she able to move on, this also offers the opportunity for them to develop a healthy relationship in the near or far future. I mean, seriously, Serena's supposed to be, like, somewhere between the ages of 10 and, like, 14. Most likely 10, according to a previous video of mine. So that's one reason why the two not ending up together is still on the table. A lot can happen in a few years. A more mature Serena might find someone else, or vice versa with Ash. But it's also not entirely unheard of for someone to marry their best friend that they've known for a long time. In fact, many have said that this is the best thing you can do. It seems that some of the anime writers even agree with this idea. For just one example, in episode 42 of the Advanced Generation series, titled Love at First Flight, we have a filler plot that revolves around Brock and crew helping a character named Romeo muster up the confidence to confess his feelings to his childhood friend, Juliet. And yep, they do end up together, happily ever after and all that. When Serena found Ash in Santalone City, he had just lost a gym battle and was in a rough patch of his career, especially if you take the loss to Tobias and the Unova League into account. He was so out of it that he leaves his book bag in the gym. It is at this moment that Serena enters the picture. This is the start of their real relationship. After hanging out for a while, the new trainer Serena is unsure of what to do. Ash does something that he has never done before for a long-term female companion. He is the one who invites her to come along with the group. Pretty much all of Ash's other companions have either invited themselves or were in part arranged by a professor. But it goes beyond just trivia. Ash is a real gentleman to Serena in many ways. Even if it took a 1,000-plus-year-old text to understand the significance of Ash asking Serena to teach him how to ride a Rhyhorn, there are a lot more obvious positive demonstrations, like Ash respecting Serena's interest in a gemstone museum, and even going out of his way so that Serena and Bonnie can see it. The only thing that ever held them back from being a great demonstration of a positive relationship is Serena's own immaturity, who is slowly becoming less problematic as she is given a chance to broaden her horizons. If there's one thing that they've done right so far with Serena, it's her character development through her pursuing her newfound dream. One thing that always really bothered me about the otherwise fantastic movie Frozen is that it was the first Disney movie in my memory that actually bothered to set up an even relatively positive example of the beginnings of a relationship, where they actually got to know each other by talking about something other than how pretty or handsome they are. But of course, only for the guy to turn out to be a villain. This was mostly the fault of the crappy writing of past Disney movies, rather than Frozen itself, but it still never sat right with me. Apparently, baby steps aren't in Disney's vocabulary. Regardless, it's not enough to teach girls when to give the guy a boot. Both girls and boys also need to know what a healthy relationship looks like. So Ash and Serena ending up together might not be so bad after all. If anything, it'd be almost too perfect. But what matters is the emphasis on equality and respect. Even as far back as episode 7, these themes have been made obvious. So which story did the writers want to tell? One about a girl finding happiness without needing a man to do so? a coming-of-age story without the predictable part about the guy being a jerk, or about this truly equitable relationship that she took the initiative to chase down. But which path has X, Y, and Z ended with? Well, neither, of course. They ended it with a first kiss, shocking pretty much everyone. And what exactly does this mean for Amourshipping again? Who knows? So in actuality, we didn't get a real conclusion yet. Both paths are still open, but there are a few changes to both of them now. Now, it could on one hand be that they don't end up together in spite of their promise for whatever reason. Reasons I would hope are actually addressed. They do have that first kiss thing going for them regardless. But I mean, newsflash people, your first kiss is not always going to be the one you end up, marrying and stuff. Dating before marriage is a thing even in Japan. I mean, come on guys, we're not talking about a different planet here. But considering the Amourshipping angle, the Amourshipping ending actually looks brighter now than it ever did. Romance, obviously, should not mean that you can't chase your own dreams. And you shouldn't really need to be with your man 24/7 either. Some distance here and there isn't always a bad thing. And you know what? Most importantly, the best part about Serena is her independence and her willingness to pursue both her dreams and a hopefully long-lasting relationship, be it with Ash or whoever. And considering this came from a country where, as a woman, you are often pressured to either quit your job when you get married or stay single for the rest of your life, this is quite possibly one of the more shocking girl power statements I've seen come out of anime in a while. It would be easy to dismiss Serena as just shipping clickbait. And with regards to the entirely male directing and planning staff, that probably was a large part of her intended role in their eyes, at least at first. But what if I told you that almost all of the Serena-centric episodes, including episode 7, the well-acclaimed Race for Home episodes, both of the date episodes, the cross-dressing episode, and the dance episode, were actually screenwritten by one of the 2 only known female screenwriters in a staff of about 11. This was no accident. Screenwriting, otherwise known as script writing, is basically what comes before storyboarding. In anime, usually the screenwriter for an episode, series compositor, directors and producers in the anime spend some time brainstorming together, and then it's the screenwriter's job to commit those ideas to paper. The script made by the writer is supposed to outline every visual, behavioral, and lingual element required to tell a story. It's important to note that changes can be made during the storyboarding process. For example, the elevator scene in the last episode of X, Y, and Z is confirmed to be different from how it went down in the screenplay. How much power the screenwriter has over what happens and how it happens in any given episode can vary from studio to studio. Ideally, according to Screenwriting.net's introduction, the rest of the staff would ask the screenwriter for input if they want to make any major changes to the episode. Though this does not always happen, the outline they have to work with throughout the process is still the product of the screenwriter. When I say that many of Serena's episodes were written by a woman, what I actually mean is basically a Kemi Amode, with a little bit of much-needed help from Atsushiro Tomioka himself. Aya Matsui must have been busy with other things, but still managed to find time to help out her Pokemon co-workers by going ahead and writing the cross-dressing episode. The sass of who was once the sole credited female non-VA staff member on the Pokemon anime for years was real in this episode, by the way. Just saying. But before we go any further, it's important to note that just because something is written by a woman does not automatically make everything perfect. Women can be bad at feminism just as much as men can be good at it. And girls certainly are not the only ones who can write strong female characters. Hence why I bring up the work of the male screenwriters as well, like Atsushiro Tomioka. But adding another female writer to the crew is also undoubtedly a step in the right direction. On Twitter, Akemi Amode has spoken about liking to try new things, and her work on a variety of genres in the past is evident when she speaks about her work on the Shonen Jump-inspired Reborn anime, and a uniquely mellow and laid-back comedy, Tanaka-kun is Always Listless, in 2016. She started screenwriting for the Pokemon anime towards the end of Best Wishes, starting with the Cheren episode, making her currently the newest addition to the writing staff, as of the point of the Sun and Moon anime. Besides her current work on Pokemon, she's now also the series compositor for this young girls show based on the new toy line. She likes to write girls, but has also never shied away from giving proper attention to male supporting characters. which is something that was especially showcased in several of her Pokemon episodes with Clement and Sophocles. Speaking of which, overall, Akemi Emote's involvement was not just good for Serena, but also the X and Y series as a whole. Emote's episodes generally tend to be chock full of details and make a point to include things like phone calls of her characters like Shauna, which other episodes are less likely to have. Whether the tendency for a lot of things to happen within the episode is part of Emote's style, or if it's the product of having a limited amount of episode time to work with, isn't always clear. But Emote's episodes were frequently praised by reviewers for the little details. And people actually tended to notice when characters like Fennekin, Serena, and Clement and other minor characters were given more attention or battled more than usual. I took notes on this. Even the reviews were over 20 minutes long. Then again, I don't really have much room to talk. This one will probably end up like at least half an hour. Akemi Emote's fresh take on how things should be done in the Pokemon anime, combined with the tried and true emotional style of Atsushiro Tomioka, each ended up covering for the other's weaknesses surprisingly well in Serena's arc. I realize that it seems weird for me to have spent most of this video talking about Amourshipping, and it is. There is indeed much more to Serena than just Amourshipping, and I would be one of the first people to encourage that. But I feel like others have already done a pretty good job of covering the rest of Serena's character already in their own videos in many ways. I'm simply filling in the blanks. And before I wrap up this video, while we are on the topic of Akemi Emote, there is one more screenwriter I would like to talk about briefly. Aya Matsui. She is the first known female screenwriter for the Pokemon anime according to my sources on the internet. She also conveniently joined the crew around the same time that Mei was introduced in the Advanced Generation series. But not only did Aya Matsui have a role in the time when how the female traveling companion in the Pokemon anime was pretty much revolutionized, i.e. she got more than one focused episode every century, and actually accomplished something other than follow Ash around, but Aya Matsui as a screenwriter has done some other pretty cool things too. The first Pokemon episode that Aya Matsui is credited to have written, and by extension, the first Pokemon episode to have been screenwritten by a woman, was Trees a Crowd from the Advanced Generation series, which is pretty darn cool since even before I knew this, Trees a Crowd was one of my personal favorite episodes. In conclusion, for both how the female characters are treated and for the anime as a whole, recruiting diverse talent to work on the Pokemon anime has proven not once now, but twice to produce promising results. That's pretty darn cool. And that's all I really have time for today. Feel free to subscribe for a variety of anime and pop culture analysis content and a few Let's Plays here and there. And follow my Twitter and Facebook for updates and other extra stuff. And be sure to let me know what you think of Serena, Amourshipping, and or Akemi Emote and Aya Matsui in the comment section.